My name is Amelia Hart, and I'm 27 years old. This morning, my brother threw 50 cents at me, right in front of a full cafe, like I was some street performer who should be grateful for crumbs. He smirked and said, "Keep the change, sis," before walking out like he'd just performed an act of charity. The entire morning crowd at Hartcumber Cafe went silent. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced a smile and said, "Thank you," because that's what I'd learned to do. Smile through humiliation. Be agreeable. Be the peacekeeper. Be invisible. "Where are you watching from?" I asked softly, staring into the camera later that night as I recorded my story for YouTube. "And tell me, have you ever been treated like you don't matter by the people who should have loved you the most?" To understand how I got there, standing behind that counter in a coffee-stained apron, we need to go back 6 months. It started with a phone call from my grandfather, Walter Hart, the man who'd practically raised me. His voice on the phone was shaky, the kind of tone he used when he didn't want to admit he needed help. "Millie, sweetheart," he'd said, "I know you're busy with your design work, but I could use an extra pair of hands down at the cafe, just for a few days." A few days turned into weeks, then months. And somehow, the girl who once dreamed of being an art director was suddenly waking up at 4:30 a.m. to open a tiny cafe on 42nd Street that the city had long forgotten. Hart Co. wasn't just a business, it was history. My grandparents opened it in 1980, and by 1990 they owned 10 locations across New York. But when Grandma June passed away, my grandfather sold every one of them except this one. It was the place they'd met, the place they'd built their dreams. "This cafe," he used to say, "is where your grandmother's laughter still lives." So I stayed. I brewed coffee, cleaned counters, and listened to the sound of old jazz playing softly in the mornings. Every cup of coffee I poured carried a piece of her, and him. By afternoon, I was a freelance graphic designer. But in the mornings, I was just Millie from Hart Co., Grandpa's granddaughter who smiled through exhaustion and kept the cafe alive. The regulars became my small, chaotic family. Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who always asked, "How's your grandfather today?" Officer Reed, who barely spoke but left a folded $5 bill every time. And then there was Ethan, the architecture student who spent every morning sketching the cafe's old wooden beams. And of course, there was my brother, Benjamin, 31, corporate lawyer, golden boy, and my parents' pride and joy. Benjamin, or Ben, as he preferred everyone else to call him, stopped by every few mornings, never for coffee, just for attention. This morning was no different. At 7:15 sharp, the bell chimed and there he was, immaculate in his tailored navy suit and polished shoes, carrying an ego too large for the doorframe. Well, he announced loudly, "if it isn't the family disappointment." I ignored the laughter that rippled from a nearby table. "Good morning, Ben. The usual?" "Actually," he said, glancing at his Rolex, "make it a large. Got an important meeting, the kind successful people have." I handed him the coffee with a smile. "That'll be $4.50. He pulled out a $20, held it up dramatically, then smirked. On second thought, he switched it for a $5. Then, with theatrical flair, dropped a few coins onto the counter. "There, a little something extra, for your hard work." The cafe went silent. Mrs. Patterson's spoon froze mid-stir. Even Officer Reed's newspaper lowered. I smiled. "Thank you, Ben. Have a good day." He left satisfied, probably thinking he'd won. But that moment, something in me shifted. For years, I'd laughed off his cruelty, convinced that staying quiet made me strong. But now, standing in front of the espresso machine, staring at my reflection in its polished steel, I barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked tired, defeated. Like someone who'd spent her life apologizing for taking up space. That evening, I called my best friend Sophie. "He threw coins at you?" she repeated, voice sharp. "Like, literally threw them?" 50 cents, I said flatly, and a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Millie, that's not normal. You need to stop making excuses for him. He's just stressed, overworked. Don't start," Sophie cut in. "You're stressed too. You're juggling 2 jobs and taking care of your grandfather. The difference is you don't treat people like garbage." Her words hit harder than I expected. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every little moment where I'd let someone, Ben, my parents, even customers, make me feel small. And I made a promise to myself, tomorrow I'll stop being the family doormat. I didn't know then that tomorrow would be the day everything began to unravel. At dawn, I arrived to find Grandpa already sitting in his favorite corner, nursing a cold cup of coffee. "You're early," I said, setting down my bag. He looked up, his blue eyes distant. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Been thinking about your grandmother." I smiled gently. "Tell me about her." His eyes softened. She had a way of making everyone feel seen. That's what made the coffee special. Not the blend, not the roast. It was her warmth. People came for her kindness more than caffeine. He glanced around the cafe, his voice lowering. "This place, it's her heartbeat. I can't let it die." "You won't," I promised. "I'll make sure of it." But as he smiled, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. At 6:30 sharp, Mrs. Patterson arrived. "Good morning, dear ones," she chirped. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Grandpa greeted. "Claire's got everything under control as usual." As I made her decaf, Grandpa whispered, "Your brother came by yesterday." I froze. "Ben?" He nodded. Asked about the business, about property value, insurance, strange questions for a lawyer to ask his old man. A knot formed in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Not much, just that we're doing fine, but it felt off. Like he was more interested in what this place is worth than how it's doing." Before I could respond, Officer Reed walked in, giving me a curt nod. "Morning." Then, glancing at Grandpa, he added, "He looks pale, kid. You sure he's okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long week." But Reed didn't look convinced. "Family business can get messy," he said, sliding over his usual dollar tip. "Keep your eyes open." The words lingered. By noon, the cafe had emptied out. Grandpa sat at his corner table, pushing his sandwich around the plate. "Maybe I'll head home early today," he said quietly. "Of course," I said, but something about his tone unsettled me. Before leaving, he touched my shoulder. "Millie, you've got your grandmother's heart. Whatever happens, don't let anyone make you smaller." It felt like a goodbye, though I didn't know why. That evening, I got a text from Ben. "Ben, family dinner, Sunday. Big news. Bring Mom's lasagna recipe, Grandpa's favorite." My chest tightened. Ben never hosted family dinners unless he wanted something. And the mention of Grandpa made my pulse quicken. Something told me this wasn't going to be about lasagna. Sunday arrived faster than I wanted it to. The sky hung gray over Manhattan, the kind of heavy, low cloud cover that makes the city feel smaller than usual, like it's holding its breath. I stood in my parents' kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the lasagna on a ceramic tray. Mom fluttered around me, her gold bracelet jingling like a warning bell. "You really shouldn't have stressed yourself over that old recipe," she said, adjusting the salt shaker that didn't need adjusting. "Ben could have ordered something from that Italian place he loves." I bit back a reply. That old recipe was Grandpa's favorite. Grandma June used to make it for every family gathering. The smell of baked cheese and oregano always meant warmth, laughter, and love. Now it felt like nostalgia served on a plate for a family that no longer remembered how to love each other. "Mom," I said quietly. "Ben specifically asked for it." "Yes, well." She smoothed her blouse and sighed. "Your brother has good taste." There it was again, that tone that said without saying it, "Your brother is the star. You're the moonlight that reflects his shine." I carried the lasagna into the dining room where Dad sat at the head of the table, already in his usual position of silent authority. His newspaper was folded neatly beside his plate, as if to remind everyone that he'd been busy reading something more important before we arrived. And then there was Ben, my brother, lounging at the other end, sleeves rolled to his elbows like he owned the place, his phone face up beside his wine glass. "Ah, there she is," he said, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. "Our family chef." I placed the tray in the center of the table without comment. "So what's this important family business you mentioned?" I asked, taking my seat. Mom's fork clinked nervously against her plate. Dad folded his hands. Ben looked far too pleased with himself. "Well," he said, leaning forward, "I've been doing a little thinking about Grandpa, and about the cafe." I froze. My stomach turned cold. "What about it?" He smiled, that calm, calculated smile he probably used in court. "He's getting older, Millie. The cafe's too much for him to handle, and frankly, it's not practical for him to keep running it. I've been looking into options. Options? I echoed. Ben nodded, opening a leather folder and sliding a few sheets across the table like we were in a board meeting instead of a family dinner. These are offers from developers. That property is worth a fortune. $2 million, maybe more. It's prime Manhattan real estate, and frankly, the cafe isn't exactly raking in profits. My fork clattered against the plate. You want him to sell it? I want him to retire comfortably, Ben said smoothly. To have a real home, maybe assisted living with proper care. He deserves that. Mom chimed in, her tone carefully rehearsed. Sweetheart, we just want what's best for him. He's been overworking himself. He loves that cafe, I said. It's his life. Dad sighed as if he'd anticipated my pushback. We're not saying he can't enjoy his life, Amelia. But the reality is, that place isn't sustainable forever. Your grandfather's 81. He needs stability. He has stability, I shot back. He has me. Ben leaned back, crossing his arms. You? Come on, Millie. You're freelancing part-time and playing barista for free. That's not stability. That's sentimentality. Something inside me snapped, though I hid it behind a calm voice. I'm there every day. I see what that place means to him. It's more than a building, Ben. Ben's tone hardened. And I see the bigger picture. You're letting nostalgia cloud your judgment. Mom reached for her wine, murmuring, Let's not fight. No, I said, cutting her off. Let's. Because this isn't about Grandpa's comfort, is it? It's about the money. The words hung in the air like static before a storm. Even Dad looked momentarily uncomfortable. Ben smiled, slow, measured, venomous. You think I need his money? Please, I'm trying to protect it. You're too naive to understand that sometimes love means making hard decisions. Love? I scoffed. You humiliate me in public, you treat Grandpa like a liability, and you call that love? Mom's voice trembled slightly. Amelia, you're being dramatic. I laughed bitterly. Am I? You all sat here and decided to sell the one thing he has left of Grandma June. Did anyone even bother to ask him what he wants? Of course we did, Ben said, brushing off my words. But it's not his decision anymore. He's not well, Millie. You've seen it. The confusion, the fatigue. He's not the man he was. My heart hammered against my ribs. He has good days and bad days. That doesn't mean he's incapable of running his business. Ben gave me a pitying look that made me want to scream. You don't get it, do you? If he refuses, the state will get involved eventually, and then we all lose. I stared at him, realization dawning. You're preparing to take control of his finances. Dad cleared his throat. Benjamin's been in touch with an attorney about establishing power of attorney. It's standard procedure. I felt my pulse roar in my ears. Without his consent? Of course we'll get his signature, Ben said casually. You'll just have to convince him it's in his best interest. The room seemed to tilt. Mom passed me a napkin as though that could fix the betrayal flooding through my veins. Why me? I asked, voice shaking. Why not you? Ben's smile sharpened. Because he trusts you. You're the good granddaughter, remember? After dinner, I drove straight to Grandpa's apartment above the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The neon sign below flickered faintly, Hartco Ester 1980. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The lights were on, but Grandpa wasn't downstairs. His cane leaned against the counter, and a half-drunk cup of coffee sat cold near the register. Grandpa? I called, climbing the narrow staircase to his apartment. There was no answer. The sight that met me froze my blood. Grandpa was on the floor beside his bed, pale and trembling, one hand clutching his chest. Millie, he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I think it's my heart. I dropped to my knees, fumbling for my phone. I'm calling 911, don't move. The next few minutes were a blur. The ambulance sirens, the paramedics, the rush of cold night air as they wheeled him out on a stretcher. His hand clutched mine, trembling, as if he was trying to say something. You're going to be okay, I whispered, even though my throat was closing. Just hang on, please. At Mount Sinai Hospital, I paced the sterile hallway outside the ICU. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes. Every beep from the heart monitor made me flinch. When Ben and my parents arrived an hour later, I almost didn't look up. Mom rushed over immediately, tears glistening in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, is he—" "He's stable," I said flatly. "For now." Ben stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Did the doctors say what caused it?" "They think it was stress," I said, my voice sharp. "Maybe from someone questioning him about money and property." Ben didn't flinch. "You can't seriously think—" "I don't have to think, Ben. I know. You pushed him." He sighed, lowering his voice like he was talking to a child. "You're emotional. You need to calm down before you make accusations you'll regret." Mom shot me a pleading look. "Please, not here." But I couldn't stop. "Do you even hear yourself? He had a heart attack, and all you care about is getting his signature on a piece of paper." Ben's eyes narrowed. "You think you're the hero in this story, don't you? The dutiful granddaughter saving the family cafe. But you don't see the reality? He's one bad fall away from losing everything. You should be thanking me." I stared at him, disgust curling in my stomach. "You're not protecting him. You're circling him like a vulture." Dad stepped in then, his tone final. "Enough. This isn't the place." But Ben just smiled. "That's fine. We'll talk later, and when you're thinking rationally." He turned to leave, but I caught his arm. "If you go near him again without telling me, I'll make sure you regret it." For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of something behind his cool mask. Not fear exactly, but recognition. He wasn't used to being challenged. He certainly wasn't used to hearing no. When visiting hours ended, I sat beside Grandpa's bed. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his hand found mine. "Millie," he whispered, "don't let them take it. Promise me." My throat burned as I nodded. "I promise." His hand relaxed slightly in mine, and a faint smile ghosted his lips. "You've got your grandmother's fight. She'd be proud." I sat there long after he drifted back into sleep, staring at the faint rise and fall of his chest. That night, I decided something I couldn't take back. If my brother wanted a war over that cafe, over our family's heart, then I'd give him one. And this time I wouldn't play the quiet doormat. The next few days passed in a haze of fear, coffee, and adrenaline. Between hospital visits and morning shifts at the cafe, I felt like I was living two separate lives, one where I was the caretaker, holding my grandfather's world together, and another where I was the soldier, quietly preparing for battle. Grandpa was improving but still weak. Every time I saw him, he seemed smaller, his once lively eyes dulled by exhaustion. Yet when we talked about the cafe, that old spark returned. "Promise me, Millie," he said one morning, his voice gravelly. "No matter what your brother says, no matter what your parents think, don't let them sell it. That cafe is your grandmother's soul. Don't let greed bury it." "I promise," I whispered, holding his hand. "They won't touch it." But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Ben didn't back down from anything, especially money. That afternoon, I stopped by the cafe to grab a few papers Grandpa had asked for. As I approached the door, I noticed a sleek black SUV parked out front. Ben's. My stomach twisted. Through the window, I saw him inside with a man in a gray suit, both hunched over a laptop at one of the corner tables. I slipped inside quietly, keeping my expression neutral. "Ben?" He looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then plastered on that fake professional smile. "Hey, sis. Didn't expect you here." "Clearly," I said flatly. My eyes flicked to the man beside him. "Who's your friend?" The man extended his hand. "Daniel Crow. I'm a financial advisor. Your brother and I were just discussing estate planning for your grandfather." "Estate planning," I repeated slowly, my pulse spiking. "Without him present?" Ben's voice sharpened. "We're just making sure everything is ready when the time comes. You'd know that if you thought long term." "When the time comes?" I echoed, stepping closer. "He's still alive, Ben." He sighed, closing his laptop. "Don't be dramatic. You think you're helping him by keeping him stuck here, slaving over a coffee machine every morning? You're enabling him. This place is sentimental clutter." "Sentimental clutter?" My voice cracked like glass. "This is his life's work. This is the last thing he built with Grandma June. And it's a liability now," Ben snapped, his patience thinning. "Do you know how much this property is worth? I could have 3 developers lined up by Friday. All he has to do is sign. I stared at him, speechless for a moment, then quietly asked, "And if he doesn't?" His expression shifted. He didn't answer. That was enough of an answer. That night, I called Sophie. "He's already making deals," I said, pacing my apartment. "He brought some finance guy to the cafe." Sophie's voice was sharp. "He's planning to trap your grandfather legally. You need proof." "Proof?" "Yes, documents, recordings, anything that shows he's acting without consent. If he files for power of attorney or tries to claim incapacity, it'll be your word against his. Get ahead of him." Her words sparked something in me. That old strategic part of my brain that used to love solving design problems and figuring out patterns. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a battle of evidence, perception, and control. I started digging. That night, after closing, I went through the cafe's old filing cabinet. Inside were handwritten ledgers, faded receipts, and a dusty folder labeled Property Ownership. Inside, I found the original deed. The cafe building was entirely paid off, registered in my grandfather's name alone. No joint ownership, no loans, just him. But that wasn't all. There was a second document, an updated will from 8 years ago. My heart stopped as I scanned it. "To my granddaughter, Amelia Hart, for her loyalty and dedication, I leave the Hartcumber Cafe and all associated assets." My name, written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Witnessed, notarized, dated. I sat down hard on the stool behind the counter, the weight of the paper trembling in my hands. All this time, he'd already chosen me. He'd already seen my loyalty, long before I ever realized I'd need this proof. By the next morning, I had a plan. Ben showed up at the hospital that afternoon, crisp and polished as always, carrying a bouquet of lilies and a folder under his arm. Mom and Dad arrived a few minutes later. I was already there, sitting beside Grandpa's bed, flipping through a magazine I wasn't really reading. "Millie," Mom said, her tone falsely bright, "Benjamin has some paperwork he'd like to go over with your grandfather." I stood slowly. "Paperwork?" Ben's smile was pure ice. "It's just a few documents to make sure his affairs are in order." I turned to Grandpa. His eyes were wary but calm. "What kind of documents?" he asked. "Just basic estate planning, things to protect your interests," Ben replied smoothly, opening the folder. "Power of attorney, title transfer, nothing binding yet, standard stuff." My stomach turned. He was really doing it, right here beside a hospital bed? Grandpa frowned. "I already have a will." Ben chuckled. "Yes, but it's outdated. We're just updating it. You don't need to worry." "I do worry," I interrupted, "because you're rushing him while he's recovering from a heart attack." Mom's voice cut in, soft but firm. "Amelia, please. Let your brother handle this. He's the lawyer." I turned to her, my voice shaking. "The lawyer who humiliated me in public? The one who's already meeting developers behind Grandpa's back?" Ben's jaw tightened. "You're out of line." "Am I?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the recording app. "Because I have the entire conversation from yesterday at the cafe. You and your financial advisor. Every word." His face paled slightly. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Grandpa looked from me to Ben, his expression hardening. "You met with people about selling my cafe?" Ben exhaled through his nose. "Dad, I was trying to help you. You're not in any condition to manage it anymore. That's not your decision." Grandpa's voice cracked, but it carried weight. "You think because you wear a fancy suit you can decide my future? That cafe is mine. It's your grandmother's legacy. You'll destroy it for money you don't even need." Mom reached out a trembling hand. "Walter, please, calm down." "Don't you tell me to calm down," he said sharply. "You're as guilty as he is. All of you." Ben's composure faltered. "Dad, I've already updated my will," Grandpa said coldly. "Amelia gets the cafe, everything connected to it. You won't see a penny from me." The room went still. Ben blinked, stunned, his confident facade cracking like porcelain. "You can't be serious," he said finally, his voice trembling with disbelief. Grandpa turned his head toward me, his hand weakly reaching for mine. I've been serious for a long time, Benjamin. You just didn't notice. Ben's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might say something cruel. Instead, he just gathered his folder, stood, and muttered, "You'll regret this." Then he stormed out, his parents trailing behind like stunned shadows. 3 weeks later, Grandpa was discharged from the hospital. His recovery was slow but steady. I spent my mornings running the cafe and my evenings helping him organize paperwork. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, he handed me a new envelope. Inside was a notarized document, the transfer of ownership for Hart Co. "It's yours now," he said simply. My throat tightened. "Grandpa, you don't have to—" "I do," he interrupted. "Because you're the only one who understands what this place really is. Not a business, not a piece of property, a legacy." I hugged him, tears spilling freely. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. But Ben wasn't done. 2 months later, I received a letter from his law firm, a formal notice claiming concerns over the validity of the transfer of ownership due to mental incapacity at the time of signing. I stared at the document, my hands trembling. He was challenging it. My own brother was trying to undo everything. Sophie came over that night with pizza and her laptop. "Okay," she said, pushing a slice toward me. "Then we fight dirty." We spent hours compiling evidence. The hospital's doctor's notes confirming Grandpa's lucidity, the deed, the recordings, the witnesses who saw him sign. But the pièce de résistance was something Ben hadn't expected. A video recording Grandpa had insisted on making the day of the transfer. In it, he looked directly into the camera and said, "This is my choice. I, Walter Hart, of sound mind and body, transfer ownership of Hartcomer Café to my granddaughter, Amelia Hart. She is the heart of this family, and the only one who remembers what that means." When Ben's lawyer saw the video, the case evaporated. He tried one last time, showing up at the cafe one rainy morning, rainwater dripping off his expensive coat. "You think you've won, don't you?" he sneered. I wiped down the counter slowly. "I don't need to win, Ben. I just needed to stop losing." He laughed bitterly. "You're nothing without me." I looked him in the eye and smiled. Really smiled. Funny. I used to believe that. He hesitated, jaw tightening, then turned and left without another word. The bell chimed softly as the door closed behind him. Months later, the cafe thrived. I updated the decor but kept the heart of it intact. The old photos, the mismatched mugs, the smell of cinnamon and hope. Locals came not just for coffee, but for comfort. Mrs. Patterson brought her grandchildren now. Officer Reed still grunted for his usual. Ethan finished his degree and gifted me a framed sketch of the cafe with a note, "Some things are too good to replace." And every morning, Grandpa sat by the window with his cup of black coffee, watching the sunrise spill over the city. "Your grandmother would have been proud," he said once, smiling softly. "I think she already is," I replied. That night, I closed up the cafe, turned off the lights, and looked through the window at the neon sign that glowed faintly against the dark. Hart Co. Once I thought being the quiet one, the peacekeeper, made me weak. But now I knew the truth. Sometimes quiet people aren't weak at all. They're just waiting for the right moment to speak, to stand, to fight back, and when they finally do, the world listens.